be like, yes, on paper, this person looks great and I want to hire them. Like, did you actually vet them properly? Did you make them come in and pitch you and do whatever you need them to do in the hiring process? Like, people like to blame candidates and they don't like to blame the fact that they're no good at interviewing or making hiring decisions, and they always hire the wrong people. And that's generally the case. It's just bad hiring.
Downsizing from 12 back to 2, if that's what you do, like, that's a very expensive thing when they're full-time employees in America, or, even worse in Europe.
It's not just the expense though. Like, I've seen, from a people perspective, you have to talk about the brand damage it does. Like, for hiring in the future, when you go to hire other A+ marketing talent and you hired wrongly because you made poor planning, and then you have 5 marketers pissed off on glass doors blasting your company, right? So I think that's the more damage than the upfront financial cost. Like, yes, the upfront financial cost sucks and that's not great, right? But the worst part, I think, is like, it's so hard to hire good people once you've fired good people because you made a mistake.
All right. Welcome to Seed to Sequoia, the podcast about early stage go-to-market. If you're a regular listener or you like what you've heard in this first 15 seconds, please take a moment to rate, like, and subscribe. This is huge for us, and it helps other people find the podcast. I can't say it enough, but I'll try. Today, we talked to Chase Woolard, founder of Early Stage HQ. He's a longtime recruiter and HR partner to founders. Many founders fail by not seeing enough good candidates, by struggling to find the right candidate, and for settling for the wrong candidate. A lot of the times, they might not even realize they're settling. Today, we talk about everything related to sales and marketing hiring and how that fits into your larger go-to-market strategy and how that can in turn fit into your fundraising and company growth and exit strategy. We hit the even more controversial questions, such as whether tenure is the most important thing when you look at candidates, brand name of the companies they're at, whether capped or uncapped bonus structures are better, whether to give people draw or not, whether to hire 2 account execs at the same time, and so much more. With that, let's tune in to what Chase has to say about all of these fun topics around HR and hiring. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Seed to Sequoia, a podcast about go-to-market for early-stage companies. Today, I'm super excited to have Chase Woolard on. He's an expert at hiring, and I've worked with him for the better part of a decade now, which is a little bit frightening. Chase, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Been watching your clips of these coming out and excited to do one of these with you. Like Alex said, I work in recruiting. I'm based in the Bay, technically Tahoe now, but still in the Bay. And I've started in the consulting world, worked with early stage startups for pretty much the last 13 years. Eventually moved into working internal at startups like AngelList and Host, both going from Series A, Series B, building across technical and a lot of go-to-market. So we're here today to talk go-to-market hiring. I also founded an agency. We're a small team. We work 6 people, help advise teams from seed to Series A, Series B, even into Series C. And that's what we're here to talk about, go-to-market hiring and how startups do it well and how they do it not so well.
So Chase is the guy I go to when my clients need to find talent. And I think one of the biggest things in go-to-market is finding good talent. Why don't we start with, what does hiring and the team look like at different stages? Because you've been there, everything from just got funding all the way through Series C, Series D.
What's absolutely. Like? Yeah, I think we're actually getting to a turning point, right? Like, this, right? For all of us who are, I don't want to use the word older because we're not, we're still in our prime. But for all of those who, went through the 2010s, right? Who saw kind of the model of like take cash and build and scale. We saw it have success in some ways, and we also saw it fail, right? We've seen it break companies. And I think what you're seeing now is more of a concerted effort, kind of coming from the top down at the VC advisor stage, where they're telling teams to be leaner in their hiring strategies, be smarter in their hiring strategies. And it's funny because it's kind of like the same thing I've been griping about since the beginning of time. But, everybody gets caught up when they raise a lot of money and they get told, hey, you have to hit these numbers. You need headcount to hit these numbers. And I think at every stage, whether it's seed, Series A, Series B and beyond, let's use B, C, and D together. I think, at those three stages, there's some very clear differences in what needs to be done and how you hire and the level of investment you can spend and, how you leverage your networks, how you leverage the networks of, the team that you have at the time, et cetera. All of that has to scale up within reason. You see mistakes, you see positives, but what you really see is very few founders, unless they've done it before and honestly had success or have had massive failure, one or the other. You see first-time founders run into like the same challenges almost at every stage historically. And what I've noticed over the last 14 years, it's pretty consistent as they go from seed, Series A, Series B. So it's unique challenges, unique things at different stages. We can get into kind of how those work a little bit, but in my experience, when you get to that seed hire, everybody's in Series A is kind of the same way. You branch out a little bit, but seed's all about building, right? You're building, whether it's product, whether it's go to market, and you're building a product market fit. You're trying to figure out what's that ICP. Can we actually scale it, right? Like your seed level now, everybody's telling you need to make $1 million in revenue, which is right, pretty wild. In our days, you could be
maybe
3
it's 2
years
million.
removed.
$1 million was a lot back in 2010.
So, you need $1 million, you need 2 million now to get a seed. So you really do have to work on, once you get that seed, providing really good product market fit while also finding some people that can also sell your product, right? Whoever sells your product or markets your product at the seed stage is probably pretty drastically different from the person that sells and markets your product at the Series B stage, right?
Yeah, I want to get into some of those challenges in detail and some of the mistakes people make. But just on a fundamental level, let's say I've raised my seed. I call you up. I'm like, hey, I need to hire a sales guy, right? Do you say sure, or do you ask questions like, I don't know. Do you have customers? What's that engagement?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. You're not hiring salespeople without somebody having a founder-led sales kind of success, right? It's almost unfair to expect any kind of decent salesperson to come in and start at zero. I think there has to be some sort of traction. If you're a technical co-founder, like if someone came to me and they were say there was 2 co-founders and they're both engineers or product engineering, whatever, and they don't have a strong sales-based person, like that happens sometimes, I would advise on finding a third co-founder that can do go-to-market sales, go-to-market planning, someone with like your background, right? That's what I would say, because I think you have to have somebody who can sell that from the fundamental founder level. Maybe that founder used to be in customer success or used to be an AE or whatever they've done, business development, but there has to be someone at the top that can get it to 500,000, $1 million, right? Something in there kind of, in that process. And if you can't do that telling your founder story, you can't expect anybody to come in and sell that, off the street that's going to be an AE, no matter how much success they've had in the past, right? So let's say we get to that point, and we know the founder has sold. We have the ability, the founders have sold some products, we have some customers. Those are the questions you want to find out. What is the salesperson walking into, right? Is it a total blank space? Is there any strategy? Is there any lead gen happening? Maybe they're leveraging an outsourcing firm. Maybe they're getting some MQLs through other ways. Like those kind of things are the questions you're wanting to ask. And if they can't answer those from a hiring standpoint, that's what we got to find out first, right? So those are the things we're really looking for. If those are there and in place, then it comes to what type of person you want. And generally, unilaterally, the person that can get you from 1 million to 6 to 10 million is almost the same across any kind of like SaaS services, type of profile. It's going to be a really good individual contributor who is, can take all of, close a deal from start to finish, who can work a full cycle of a deal and be able to sell. You don't necessarily need a manager. You need someone who's more of like a lead, right? They could manage, say you got an SDR, they could probably lead an SDR team or 2, but your first hire has to be someone who sells, right? Who sells. And maybe that person sticks with you. Like I've seen historically it work well that your first salesperson turns into a sales manager, right? And they level themselves up one day. Maybe your first salesperson is currently a manager who had a lot of success as an IC, is willing to go back and be an IC in order to build their own team. But you need something like that where someone knows they have to do. At the seed stage, everybody builds. And if anyone doesn't want to build, it's a big red flag.
I love the build, not building is a red flag. Let's talk about red flags in general, because I think I have this thing where a lot of people have the symptoms and don't know it because they don't know what to look for. What are the mistakes that people make? And you mentioned some of these mistakes are made across the board.
Yeah.
What are the mistakes that you see?
Early on, it's too much focus on strategy, I think, especially on like the sales and go to market. Everyone thinks that it's so important that the strategy side is so all encompassing. And it is. I'm not saying you can't have like a really refined strategy, but if you can't attract a market qualified lead, or you can't have set 8 calls a month if your founder's acting like an SDR or whatever, right? Things that you would require of your normal people you would hire. What are you doing, right? So those are the worst mistakes, is thinking that the salesperson is going to come in and solve everything if you can't actually do it, right? And then beyond that, when you hire a salesperson, if they're just talking strategy and they want to come in and they want to manage and they don't want to do, that's the critical stuff, right? Like, we need to talk numbers almost across what you expect to do within 6 months, 12 months. What does your pipeline goals look like? What does your deals close look like? What is your, what's been your success over the last 5 years historically with your quota? That's something a lot of founders don't dive into. They don't actually get into, they'll hire people and they'll never talk to them about what their actual numbers were, how often they hit success, what the average deal size was, like things like that and beyond don't get asked. And, people get kind of, enamored with people's companies they've worked at, and they don't actually think like, what success did they have? In sales, you can have moderate success and stick around. It's the people that have, minimal success that usually job hop. But people keep even moderate, middling performers around for consistent amount of times, because even moderate sales performance is revenue, right? It's moderate and above. So you really have to differentiate between average and good. And like those two people can look like the same person, right? Like it really can. And that's why having a really good interview process, hiring questions, making sure your team's interviewing for that kind of stuff properly is really important.
How do you distinguish, both you when you're looking at somebody's LinkedIn profile to find candidates to bring in, and then in that interview process, how do you distinguish between that middling performer and the overachiever?
Yeah, I mean, like when I say they could look the same, right? You'll never see in sales and marketing someone who's not at least halfway decent or better at their job have long tenures, right? So the biggest thing you're looking for when you're looking to hire a really good sales marketer, and when I say, if you're looking, even both of those, let's just talk all go-to-market hiring. Your first 2 hires on a sales and marketing side are probably a do-it-all full stack marketing manager and a do-it-all, sales AE. Maybe you hire 2 AEs, right? If you have like someone over them that can manage them. We have
to come back to that. That's my favorite subject.
Yeah, maybe you do, maybe you don't. I think if you hire right, you're just wasting money, right? But yeah, we'll come back to that. But at the same time, if those 2 roles are there, right, the same expectation is kind of there for at the end, right? Like if they've been in their jobs, they've had stability, they have multiple stints of 3-4 years, they've probably had at least a modicum of success, right? So, again, that's the first outlier. Cross out anybody who's, job hopped, no matter what they tell you. Company had layoffs, cool. Nobody's laying off anybody that sells or brings in MQLs. And if they were a part of layoff culture, it's really hard. One time is okay. But if they've been a part of multiple layoffs, I know go-to-market is tough, but, it's one of those things where the top rises. I personally find that when you get that in and you see, okay, well, now we're looking at 2 people who have been in, decent companies for 3 years. How are we talking? When you look at their profiles, when you look at their resumes, when you're screening them, ask them to talk about the type of revenue they've produced. That's the one thing that if you have anyone talk about revenue produced, like, well, what came out of it? Like what revenue came out of your sales? What did you sell? Did you hit your quota? Yeah. Well, what was your quota? I hit quota. I was 117% over quota. What was your quota? 750,000. You know what I mean? Those are the details you're looking for. If their quota is 1.5 million and they hit 2 million in sales, cool. That's a big different number, right? So I think people do not get into the numbers enough. They're more enamored with like, how would you sell my product? Not how have you sold historically successfully and had, really good results.
So what is good? Because a lot of people listening to this podcast might not know, if you're a founder, you might not know what a normal quota is. Like if you're in a SaaS startup, venture-backed, Series A-ish, what is a normal quota that somebody would be carrying? And what's normal attainment?
Yeah, I have some strong feelings on like what sales teams
That's what
do.
we want. Yeah, the podcast has strong opinions.
So yeah, like if you're an A or a B team, maybe you're moving up market, you're getting into enterprise, your sales cycles can get a little longer. Very few early stage startups have that luxury, right? So they tend to have to market and have faster sales cycles. Even if they do want to mix it up and get into the enterprise, they normally have to do some sort of mid-market deal size, right? So we're talking, you'll see early stage startups start with 20,000 to 50,000 deals. And then by the time they're Series B, they're looking for people who have moved up to 250,000 to $1 million in deals, right? So the varying sizes of where you're looking to kind of penetrate the market, right? Enterprise or mid-market kind of matters. But at the same time, if you're an early team, and you're mid-market, you may, you're still, even today, you still want 2.5x floor, ideally 3 or 4x return on your investment, right? So if you're paying someone that hit their quota, $400,000 OTE, right? A $200,000 base, $200,000 comp plan, and ideally if you're a startup, you want it uncapped. We can get into that later. But if you're paying someone, right, they hit their quota, say they hit 100% of quota, you're paying them 400,000, like whether that's marketing spend of 400,000 or sales spend of 400,000, you want 3x return on that. You'd be okay with 2.5x, but realistically you would like to get, 3x your return on what you spent. So I find if you see people that aren't like, you'll talk to people and they'll say, hey, my quota was 750,000. Cool. If you're a 200K OTE rep, right? We can talk that. But if you're a $400,000 or $500,000 rep, we're just like, we're paying you to be here, and keep our benefits. And we're probably losing money when you talk stock options. So, that being said, the more senior, the more quota should be expected, so if you're hiring somebody who's kind of, mid-level sales AE, 750 to $1 million wouldn't be unreasonable for a mid-market, right? But if you were hiring anybody with a modicum of enterprise experience, like those quotas and those numbers you need to look for are $1.5–2 million, right? Like, and again, you have to think like an enterprise person takes a little time to build, 18 months, whatever. But if they can historically tell you in detail, deals and times and successful notes of when they hit their full quota of 1.5 or 2 million or whatever, you're struggling, right? So that's where I find salespeople and marketing people are really good at selling and marketing themselves. And you have to really discern whether they're really good at actually selling and marketing. And most are, right? By the time you're really reaching out and having these strong conversations. But it's unique to this specific go-to-market function that they're a little, you have to cut through their sales process as well.
Yeah, one of the questions I always have is were they an order taker at a Google, or were they like really hustling? I'm curious, how do you look for? Is that something you look for? Right? I know, talk to founders. They're like, oh, hey, I want a sales exec, and I want them to be, have come from one of these great companies, maybe a big one in my space. How do you figure out, like, is this person somebody who's actually going to go out and hunt and kill food for a brand that isn't Google? Or they just kick back, collect checks, and aren't. But maybe what do you look for? Like, is there one that's better than the other?
I've seen both sides of this from all sides of hiring, besides just sales and marketing. You'll see it with engineers. I want an engineer, that worked at a big, a big five or whatever, right? And come over and they find that engineer actually can't handle the chaos that is the stage or these stages of companies, right? So I usually tend to be like, it's not like I tell a founder, no, you can't hire people with these backgrounds, because more often than not, and this, you'll run into people who are founders now of a startup who worked at these companies. So they will think, hey, I'm a good person. I'm at a startup. I can do this. Someone can. And again, they've already forget that they self-selected themselves into wanting startup life by starting a startup, right? So it's a little different in that aspect. So what I always tell people is if you're going to hire someone and you really want them to have background from like a Google, a Netflix, something like that, whatever, any kind of big company, whatever you're selling or going to market, if it's business to business or consumer, see if they have somewhere else on their resume a stop that's at least one successful stint at some sort of like hypergrowth or like early stage startup. Doesn't be early. It could be even, Mercury Bank size, or somebody that's like Series C right now, that's really scaling and people love. It could be OpenAI size that's even bigger, right? Just like, did they go to something that's in a really crazy, like hypergrowth chaos type environment and been at a Google, then that's really good, because we all know that like the hiring and the interview process at all of those companies is pretty much why anyone wants someone to come from there. Like that's the hardest part. Working there isn't even that hard. Getting there is like the hardest part, right? So once they've gotten there, they've made it there successfully, and maybe before that or after that, they've worked at a startup. That's what you want to see, because then they know like what it entails. You know this. You founded a startup. I was there helping you when you founded it. Like when you get into a startup world, like everything goes chaotic. You never know what you're going to deal with. Everybody likes to say like wearing a lot of hats or juggling a bunch of balls or any of these different like sayings but they're all true. Like it's chaos. It's madness. You could feel perfectly good about things one week and then think the world's burning down the next week. And people that just work at a Google or an Apple aren't used to that, right? They aren't used to that like urgency. It's why Zuck was constantly talking over the last few years about his team being soft and like not used to that urgency. Whether we agree with him or not, like he's right. Once you get into like this large apparatus where you feel like you never can fail, it's hard to have the fear of failure, right? So you just have to have felt the feet to the fire before and be able to do it.
Yeah, I think there are some companies, especially on the product and engineering front, really engineering, where they're so far removed from the actual customer. If you're in the bowels of Google's AdWords or other products where you don't, you're working on highly technical stuff, you never have to talk to customers, right? Your PRDs are coming from other engineers whose PRDs are coming from other engineers, and so the idea of like actually doing something for an end user who's not an engineer can be really hard. And I think GTM is similar but different. You get a lot of air cover, you get a lot of brand equity that a startup doesn't have, and you don't have to figure out like what does the sales deck look like, because you have a whole sales ops team that builds you sales decks with designers and everything else. So one thing that you talked about was these short timers, or not having significant duration at a few startups. Is it okay if somebody has one or two short stints? Is it they need a few long ones, or if any short stints are red flag?
I think it depends on what you're doing, right? Like if you're a Series B team looking to hire SDRs and, you see someone who's really hungry, but they haven't had success for whatever reason in their, you might be their third SDR stint out of college, but there's, they went to a good school, they say the right things. You can take that swing and you can stress a little bit less. If you are, say, a Series A startup, you have $8 million in revenue and you're hiring a sales manager to come in and lead 2 AEs, and you need someone that has gone from 6 to 25 million before. Well, they didn't do that by having 1 year stints in their job. Like no one makes those kind of sales. So you need to have someone who's been somewhere for 3 or 4 years. If they have 1 or 2 stints, like everybody can get caught up and like, oh, hey, I joined a seed company, the funding didn't come in, whatever, so I had to go. I just tend to struggle with that and go to market, because the bar for achieving is lower the earlier you are, right? So you have to like really miss the bar really early. People will blame it on product sometimes and say, well, the product wasn't right. And I get that. But at the same time, maybe that company hired too early, but also as like a salesperson, you have to recognize that when you're interviewing that, can you sell a product at this stage or can you not, right? So some part of that ownership's on you as well. So it's tough. Like if they have one, cool, I don't mind it, 1 or 2, but did they have at least 2 other matching stints of long success that they can bounce on? Great. Because if you have a stint under a year as a salesperson, I don't think it really matters for anything. Like what did you do? Like you can't really quantify it. If you closed, 3x your deal flow, there's no way you're not there the next year. And if you're a marketer and you made sure there was, 8 market qualified lead meetings set every month, they're not getting rid of you either, right? Unless, they are completely shutting down. So, it varies per story, but I really think it matters on, success.
Yeah. So your perspective is more like, were they there long enough to do the job, right? If it was growing it, if it was managing the team, whatever it is that they say they did there, like if they were there for 8 months, they didn't do it. And even if they were an IC, an individual contributor, if they were there for 8 months, like if they were asked to leave, they obviously weren't delivering 3x their cost, because why would you let somebody go who's generating revenue for you? How long, on the flip side of this, let's say I hire somebody, I took that risk on that SDR, I took that risk on that manager. Maybe it wasn't a risk. Maybe that manager fit the ideal profile perfectly. but it's been how many months and they haven't shown results? Like, how long do you give them, or how long do you counsel people, founders and CEOs, to give a go-to-market, a salesperson, before you pull the cord and say, hey, it didn't work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the HR and people side, so I'm always empathetic to people like keeping their jobs and trying to have a team that is a very core, intact, and builds together. That being said, sales and marketing is the one place where I say there's only so much counseling you can do to keep people. Like, there is a core skill set that has to be met. It's a very like binary, yes or no you sell, yes or no you market, right? And I know that people that are probably listening to this that are in sales and in marketing are probably like, he's full of it, because, there's all these market factors like COVID and the venture cycle going down, and they 100% are right. I'm not saying that's not the case, but that some industries haven't been impacted. We've seen it. We saw it in multiple spaces over the last 4 years, but anyone who wants to move forward with success has to be able to handle any environment, right? So that's my thing. Is it's in go-to-market and sales. This is just much more of a binary thing. Now, the timeline is different. Like, you'll see some people who say, hey, like, this is a conversation I had this week. Someone was like, what should we do about draw, right? So say you're a sales rep, you make a 50-50 OTE. That's pretty common. Anybody listening to this is probably pretty much aware of that. But there is a certain factor, like how much should a startup be on the hook for paying an AE rep a draw, right? Like, even if it's 25 to 40% of that full OTE over, and how long should they pay it for? And some reps will come in and they'll be pretty smart and they'll know, hey, I'm currently at a certain rate, I'm making my OTE, but if I come to your place, I won't be making my OTE. I'm going to miss it for 6 months. So I want to draw for 6 months, right? So that's a hot topic of conversation. Should you provide that draw? Should you provide higher equity for them to take the hit for 3 or 4 months? Should it be case by case? I think there's ways to advocate for all of it, but that's like a serious question you run into. Some people say 3 months draw, 6 months draw. Depends on who you're selling to. Again, this goes back to, are you an enterprise focused team? Or if you're late Series A, early Series B, you might be moving more enterprise. So, you're looking at different longer sales cycles. If you're mid-market team, you're looking at early sales cycles. Historically, if you're a mid-market team and your sales rep isn't producing extra pipeline in 6 months or sales, tell me what you think. But I think that's pretty easy to see. You may not have the most amount of closed deals, but if 6 months in, that sales rep isn't constantly building pipeline and it's not rising, and some deals are falling, you can see the red flags, right? So I think that's why 6 months is a pretty good deal. Enterprise may be more like 9 months before you should really sound the alarm. That's what's scary about hiring an enterprise rep as an early stage startup, right? So that's why I always think, have a mid-market product, then scale into the enterprise.
Well, and so when you talk about draw, just so people understand, can you just explain exactly how that works?
Yeah, so I mean, and this varies for different companies. Sastra has a really good article about it. They wrote not too long ago that came out, and they talk about it. But early startups, if you're hiring an AE comes in, more often than not, they split their total. It's called on target earnings. They say someone's coming in and they make 400,000 on target. That means they'd have to hit their quota 100%, sell, say, 1.5 million, 1 million, whatever their quota is, to make their 100% 400,000, right? Their salary is generally 50% of that. So their base salary for someone who was, say, 300K would be 150K. And then they would also be able to make another 150K based on hitting certain levels of success. If you're a salesperson and you hit, only a fraction of your quota, you may only make 200,000, right? You could also be really successful and work in an environment in an early startup that's uncapped, which, if you're an early startup, why would you ever cap anyone? But that's an argument for another day, probably.
And when you say cap, that means limit your bonus,
why would you ever have someone only be able to make 400K? Like, because they're just going to quit selling for you if they max out in month 8, right? So you want people to continue to sell. I think a company should be stoked to be paying out more than OTE to a rep any day. It means the company made a lot of money, right? So I personally feel early on you have to do that. As you get later, it gets harder. So you maybe give them a 25% over if they're performing, and you bring it down and things like that, so you control it. But early on, you want the wheels kind of off. Let them loose. Let them sell.
Right. Well, yeah. And so on the draw front, you're basically giving them that, like, hey, of the 150 extra in your 300K example, we'll give you some of this for 6 months. We'll treat it as if you hit the quota, even though you didn't. So you're able to draw the cash. And in most states, it's recoverable. Like if you get fired and you didn't ever sell anything, you're probably not, as an employer.
You're never going to recover it. Yeah, I think hoping that you're going to recover it. In theory,
it's recoverable, but yeah, you're never actually going to get it back because it is just like a partnership. It's a draw on your future earnings. But it's a tough decision, right? If you're a founder and you're like, oh, this sales guy is the best thing since sliced bread, right? And he or she is gonna, sell $1 million worth of my software or $2 million worth of my software or service. But, and all I have to do is pay him his fully loaded, $200,000 for 6 months instead of $100,000. And he won't leave otherwise, or she won't leave otherwise. That's a tough call. I think you have the selection bias problem where the people that aren't hitting their quota are the ones that are happy to leave and don't need a draw because they weren't getting their bonus anyway, but then there's somebody who wasn't achieving their quota. So, how negotiable have you found that to be?
Yeah, I've seen both sides. I've seen people say, I'm not coming unless there's draw. I've seen people say, I'll take extra equity because sales is not a very high equity position anyway. Like very rarely does anyone coming in. Yes, earlier they're getting more than most sales, but in the grand scheme of things and the cap table, sales gets the least, right? Because they have the opportunity to make the most cash. So they have more opportunity than say like myself joining as a people partner, and I'm going to have to take high equity almost always, right? To feel good about it. So salespeople, they may take a little more equity, but if they do hardline and want to draw, I'm pretty much advised 3 to 6 months, never longer, no matter what, enterprise or not. Like you should be able to make it, however you want. So 3 to 6 months, up to 40% of the draw, depending on how good they are. I think coming in around 30 to 33% is better. And that would be like giving someone the ability to make, if it was say 150,000, maybe they're able to make 50 or 60 of that for sure. And then they know they have to hustle to make the rest the last 6 months, right?
So you're not giving them all of it. You're not saying, oh, your 300 target, you're going to get all that for 6 months. You're saying like, you'll get some of it, but you got to sell to get the rest.
Yeah, I would never tell someone like, yeah, we're going to pay you 100% of your OTE for a certain amount. Like, that's just not what we're going to do. For example, I put together one like that this week, and it was, very much like, we'll pay you 40% of your OTE for the first 6 months on top of your base salary. And then I also advised the team on the finance side who was building all of the stuff to make sure that you hit achievable metrics the last 6 months, and then also bake in the results from to pay off that up front, right? So you can also, like in sales, you have the ability to design your comp plan a little different, right? So you can definitely make sure that if you were wanting, say, the back half 500,000 in revenue closed, maybe you put 550,000 in revenue closed because that's not unreasonable.
So you get your 50K back in the second 6 months, right?
You can be creative, right? Because that's fine. I think you can be creative from a sales perspective. And that's why I always tell people like sales negotiations are the hardest and the easiest because salespeople can always find middle ground. It's very rarely about the base salary and more about the total package and can they actually sell it, right? And then the closing part's kind of hard because you have to figure out draw, you have to figure out equity, you have to figure out OTE. I say no to sign-on bonuses across the board for any startup Series B and under. So just punt that out. But some companies do want sign-on bonuses.
There's a lot in there. I think one of the biggest ones is this notion of draw and the flip side of that is you could lower the quota. So yes. Is just creating a more attainable quota an alternative to draw that people should think about, or is it better to keep the quota like, hey, it's 2 million is 2 million, but we'll give you 40% of your OTE in the first 6 months?
I'm sure there's some arguments either way. I think first year quota should always be, from my experience as a people person working with sales leaders and helping them build out what they're going to share with the team. I think first year always should be a little lower anyway, or else you're setting up your sales team for, not doing as well. So that's why I said 2.5x the first year wouldn't be the worst thing, right? If someone comes in, hits that quota, and again, they don't have to, that's to get 100% of their quota, right? So if you said I need someone at 2.5x to hit 100% of their quota in year one, they come in and they only hit 2x, right? You still made plenty of ROI on your draw that you paid them. right? So
Right.
I think that's the way to look at it. And then you have a hungrier team that builds pipeline. Like if you make it harder to get to in year one, it's almost like they're guaranteed to jump ship in year two, right? Whereas like you really want someone on the sales side that can build year over year over year, because it's like sales is a momentum game. You have to snowball it. It's very, it's very much a branding. People get better at it. They get reps in. You need like a really stable sales force versus, marketing is a little more interchangeable because they're not like talking about it every single minute, but sales is so important to like keep the same really good team.
And what do you look for in marketing? We've talked mostly about sales so far, but what about these same considerations? Like, where are the mistakes with marketing? What's the sort of winning strategy for comping marketing?
It varies at different stages. So let's say seed and early Series A, and then late Series A and early Series B and beyond, right? Those are two separate, distinct things. Your first marketing hire needs to be a full stack marketer. Maybe it's a manager who's done it before, someone who can do everything, right? Maybe they're not great at everything, but they can do everything. They understand ads, they understand copywriting, they understand brands, comms, whatever, right? They could do every single thing, but maybe they're not great at it, and then you can always outsource the thing they're not great at in marketing, which is why, agencies are out there that can do the things like yourself can do, right? I think at seed and Series A, people, like your agency, like I'd rather leverage something like that while having, one hire. That is almost it, right? Like that one hire can work with SDRs. That one hire can work with the CS person that comes in, right? Like that person can do a little bit of everything. They can work with the hiring brand even, right? They can do a little bit of everything, but they're not solely focused on, MQL or anything like that, right? As you get broader, then you want to open it up. Maybe you're going to hire a product marketer specifically. Maybe you're going to actually hire your internal copywriter that's there full time, or somebody who's doing, visual design and marketing, right? Depends on what your product is. You can open it up later, but like historically, you probably don't need but one or two marketers for your first 50 hires, 75 hires, right? Like once you start getting into lifecycle marketing and email channel marketing and all of that, you start getting to these really binary, these really like things that you need to get actual results on right away, right? So I've seen Series B come in and like take a marketing team from 2 people to 12 and then actually go backwards in revenue. And you're like, how did that happen? And a lot of times
people underestimate like agencies. I mean, if all they do is run SEM campaigns, which is like something we do for a bunch of different clients, they actually get pretty good at it. And if you're just one person at one company trying to run one company's SEM campaign, you don't have the perspective of running a bunch, right? And I see like, if you're Harry's or something and you're spending millions of dollars on SEM, you can probably get really good people. But if you're a Series A startup with a 5 or 10K a month SEM budget, first off, does that justify the salary of a full-time search engine, performance marketer? Yeah. But second, like, are they going to have the perspective of what's working for other people with different sized budgets? And the other piece we didn't talk about is like the flexibility, right? Like downsizing from 12 back to 2, if that's what you do, like that's a very expensive thing when they're full-time employees in America or, even worse in Europe.
It's not just the expense though. Like I've seen, from a people perspective, you have to talk about the brand damage it does. Like for hiring in the future, when you go to hire other A+ marketing talent and you hired wrongly because you made poor planning, and then you have 5 marketers pissed off on Glassdoor blasting your company, right? So I think that's the more damage than the upfront financial cost. Like, yes, the upfront financial cost sucks, and that's not great, right? But the worst part, I think, is like it's so hard to hire good people once you've fired good people because you made a mistake, And that one thing is like when I see a company like hire wrong, then have to repeat themselves, and then the Glassdoor is bad. I can't think of too many success stories from a fractional consulting side or even internal. I've seen it internal where everything was great. I worked for a company for years, and then in 1 year, like it just and nothing has changed since, right? And I think that's how you have to look at it. Like once you go down, it's very hard to go back up. From a people
from a brand, from a hiring brand standpoint.
Yeah. So you have to be smart.
Yeah, I think things tightened up. Everybody saw it year and a half ago. Things got really tight. It was interesting to me, the technical founders I work with didn't like their engineering teams were very precious, even though they generated 0 revenue. and they'd go after the marketing and go-to-market teams. Sometimes there was dead wood and it was a good idea, but I think in general, but you end up doing a lot of this damage. And then the next person who shows up when you're ready to hire is like, well, wait a minute, like, is this a safe move for me? Are they going to get rid of me next? Or they don't understand, all the Glassdoor stuff says that they don't understand marketing. They don't value it. Probably a lot of other stuff. I could probably do a podcast just reading Glassdoor reviews. Let's talk about offboarding for a second, because I think that is a big mistake people make doing it, especially at the early stages, emotionally and wrong. Like what's the right way to offboard somebody? And does it vary by stage?
I think it varies by stage, by time someone's there, and also by the impact they've made. If someone's been in their job within that calendar year for longer than 6 months and you offboard them and don't let them have the opportunity to just get their shares for the rest of the year, like why would you do that, right? If it's somebody you actually valued and you made the mistake. Offboarding is two different ways. Are they getting offboarded because of performance related, or is it because like we just hired wrong and we gotta, extend our runway, right? So I think that's the first thing you have to answer. Like, are we just looking to extend our runway and this person's, and kind of a calamity of that, right? And you brought up yourself, like engineers didn't seem to go, right? And now we're starting to see new engineering hiring. I don't know, you've probably heard this, but there's like this thought process that one engineer is worth like $1.5 million to a startup's valuation and growth. So like when we're talking go-to-market sales, we're like 1.5, 2 million, they should bring it in. Engineers are already automatically assumed by VCs to be worth 1.5 to 2 million a year.
Well, just because they're somebody engineers. Who's bought companies, like I can just tell you now, it's kind of BS. Like
I agree.
Nobody actually values the company that way. And the press release that says so and so got acquired by Facebook for 20 million, and like the 20 million was like the stock options Facebook gave the employees to come work at Facebook. None of that went to any investors or the cap table in most cases. So I think that like there is this perception that they create value, and they may well do. And I definitely talk to founders about every hire you make should increase the value of your company. But putting a number on an engineer, right? Like you said, a salesperson should bring 2.5 to 3x more revenue than they cost. Can you draw a straight line with engineers? Like
it's like keeping a product designer around. Yeah, right. It's like keeping a product designer or a product manager around when you're laying off go-to-market people. Go-to-market people should be around if they're producing. The same for engineers. If you're not going to make new products and new builds, why keep them around, right? And that's for both sides, because engineers like to build. They don't want to just sit there and get paid and not build. They like to solve problems. I don't know. I think what we're learning, like I just recently met with a founder from a team that's raised a Series B. They've stayed really lean, 35 people. I found that to be amazing. Like 35 people, you're getting your Series B. Their engineering team was 5 people of that, which is a crazy lean team. Now they're like, hey, we just raised, plus 25 million. So we're going to hire 10 engineers. Phenomenal. That's what you want to see, right? You don't want to be that like team with 6 million in the bank that's like, hey, let's hire 10 engineers, but yet everybody does that really early on and hires too many engineers. It's like a team of 3 could probably have done this, right? So same mindset with sales. I think you really have to focus on being a lean team that has success, and then just repeat that. That's how you get to Series B. And so many people fail at it. They build something cool, they can't sell it. They build something that's not that cool, and it doesn't want to sell. But at the end of the day, you have to sell it.
Yeah, sales are the lifeblood. So we touched briefly on that. Do you hire 2 salespeople at once, or do you hire one at a time? What's your hot take on that 2 or 1 at a time?
Okay, so I think I'm fine with either or, right? But it depends on who is in house already. If someone like yourself is on the founding team and you know how to manage salespeople and marketers, and you can build decks and revenue strategies and all of that kind of stuff, you can manage 2 people and you can decide really quick which one's going to be good. Maybe both are good, but if the one's not, you can cut it loose. So I think you can hire 2 people that are a little less experienced and move a little faster if you have someone that's already doing founder sales, that understands it, that is like a go-to-market founder, right? So that's when I'm like, whatever, you can do it. If you don't have a go-to-market founder, I don't like it. I think you're better off just trying to like nail a more senior hire that's going to do it all for the first 6 months or something, because that one senior hire having success is going to lead to you hiring like their counterpart, or maybe a little like slightly more junior AE. And that's going to give them the ability to like kind of the more senior person, the ability to kind of build and scale and do what they want in their team. Because even in the sales side, if you work at a startup, you're a builder. So like you want to give someone the ability to do it. But if you're the like chief sales officer / co-founder, or like, you know, whatever, CEO, and you lead sales, it doesn't really matter, because you're going to manage that sales team anyway until you're Series B and later, right? So I think those are the two things. The whole reason behind it is one's going to fail, one's not. And someone says, well, what if the one you only hire one and they fail? I mean, hire better, interview better. Let's, you know, there's certain things with salespeople you can do. You can back channel, don't trust their references. Like anybody with a decent track record in our world is connected to people. Like we just made a hire recently, and we literally back channeled to the CEO of the company they were at for 4 years. You can't get more. They don't even know we talked to them, you know, and we had like a phenomenal conversation with the CEO, and the CEO was like, yes, this person's great. This person had went to another company for 2 years in between, and this CEO still gave us like a glowing review. So like those are the things you have to do to have success. You can't just like be like, yes, on paper, this person looks great and I want to hire them. Like, did you actually vet them properly? Did you make them come in and pitch you and do whatever you need them to do in the hiring process? Like people like to blame candidates, and they don't like to blame the fact that they're no good at interviewing or making hiring decisions, and they always hire the wrong people. And that's generally the case. It's just bad hiring.
I'm on the side of hire the one person and do it well.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I had to pick a side, I think almost at all stages, because you talked about this too, right? You're burning twice as much money. Like if you're, especially if you're paying a draw, like great, you're paying $300K or, you know, $250 OT if you're seed stage maybe. So it makes it much higher stakes. If there's something wrong with your own product or your own sales process, right, that, you know, it turns out like you mishired, right? You either hired too early and you didn't have product market fit, or there was some other, you know, one of my clients, like they discovered after a couple failed hires that like they really needed somebody with like a real engineering experience to sell. Like they couldn't just hire, even though it was a SaaS product, they couldn't hire a SaaS salesperson.
It was too technical.
Yeah. Then the customers didn't trust them. Like it wasn't that they hadn't found the right person. It was that the right person didn't exist, because you had to go on a factory floor and really know how the factory floor worked to be able to actually sell the product. And if you had hired two at once, you would have just burned twice as much cash to figure that out. Whereas, and it's twice as much management. It's, you know, it's twice as much a lot of things. Whereas if you hire one and really focus on them being successful and pay attention, like you said, and do that interview process well, that's where I've come out on it. But, you know, I think if money's no object, and, you know, back in the heyday when, we raised $20 million, so fine, we'll hire two.
I think it varies on the size too, right? Like if you're $10 million in revenue and you're a Series B company and you already have a 5-person team, it's like a sales manager, 2 reps and 2 AEs. Okay, hire by twos, right? Hire 2 AEs, hire 2 SDRs.
Then there's real economies. You have a process.
Yeah.
Your onboarding can be done in parallel. They can sit on a meetings together. They can, you know, do the training together, right? That makes sense. There's stories of Groupon hiring like 50 people every Monday back when they were going. They'd have a line around the block on the first day when everybody started, so they could all go through the hiring. Yeah. And they were almost all salespeople, do the trainings all together.
But I don't know. I feel like
pretty late.
Yeah, that's pretty brutal too, right? Like that's a pretty rough culture, right? To like know you're walking into it, you have to be built like that's like almost like a Wall Street sales culture. It's really brutal.
I think it kind of was. I mean,
it's okay. Some people are I'm sure some people thrived in it.
I mean, some insane portion of Chicago worked for Groupon at one point. Like a quarter. It's like an absurd number of people in Chicago worked at Groupon just because they hired. Nobody had ever grown that fast because it was all sales. So you touched on something. We only have a few minutes left. There are 2 things that I really wanted to hit. One was this notion of your hiring brand. Can you just say more about the whole concept of a hiring brand and how you build it?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing though I do want to touch on is you were talking about like ramp and stuff like that right before we double off that. I would say if you're a seed company, just don't ever entertain ramp, right? Like Series A, make it only case by case seed company, I wouldn't even entertain it. Just give them equity, right? Like you're mucking too much up. If someone isn't willing to take more equity and a little less salary at a seed stage, they aren't invested, right? So most likely they're employee number 8 through 15, right? In some capacities. So they should be willing to do that. So I wanted to go back and touch on that. Beyond, yeah, let's do it, right? Let's give ramp, things like that if they're really great. But yeah, so hiring brand, I think that's the biggest thing that you see. All right, you'll see people not think about it at a seed and early Series A company. So when they're 50 and less people, they don't really think about their brand or their candidate experience or how they reply to people or just anything about the overarching hiring strategy. They really just worry about how can I get the best person in the seat as quick as possible without the biggest financial impact. That's almost like everything a team under 50 is looking to solve. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, if you don't pay attention to like the strategy side, the brand side, the experience side, and, you get to 50, you burn, 10 or 15 people through bad interviewing and a mix of layoffs or firing because you hired bad. And then 5 of those people write a bad Glassdoor. Like that's enough at a small team to make your Glassdoor look like 2.5 or 3. And then you're trying to hire these people and you're honestly having to have conversations around it. And yes, a good recruiter, a good people person, a good hiring manager in a department can explain those things out. But you can't explain if you don't get on the phone. So how many times do you miss out on getting on the phone with a really good candidate if they go Google your name and then people are like, this place sucks. I don't want to work here because it's a big mess. Or this, 38% of the people show confidence in the CEO and you click that on a Glassdoor. Like it's hard to get traction. And, it's kind of like selling a product that doesn't have market fit. A recruiter can't sell a company that no one wants to work at, so you have to just think about that because you'll run into a point where your scale doesn't happen. And then to make it happen, you'll have to hire people that maybe are a little less picky and maybe they're a little more job hoppy or things like that. And when you start getting out of the realm of hiring the best that fit your company, because that's what they are, the best that fit your company, and you're actually hiring people because of availability, those are not the A players, and that's where companies fail. So that's my big theory on it, right? Like if you don't focus on it early, inevitably it's going to bite you later on.
It's all about the A players. There's something in there that also you said, recruiters can't sell a company with bad Glassdoor reviews. I had employees on my team when we were looking to get acquired, look at the acquirer's Glassdoor and be like, I don't want to work there. Like, I don't want to be acquired by this company, right? So it can hurt you even if you are successful. Ultimately, that your bad Glassdoor reviews might make it harder to acquire other companies because people look at them and they're like, this place. It's funny. I was like, they pay cash. Like I was more worried about the sort of fiduciary responsibilities I have at the team. Was like, wait a minute, like these guys, nobody has faith.
They have to go work with them for the next 12 months.
You're signing up to go work with them, and you as a founder are going to be there for at least a couple years, right? And so it makes a big difference. I mean, you do have a fiduciary duty, but if you can avoid that, right? If you can avoid the bad Glassdoor reviews.
If that's your brand and you're selling as a marketer and a salesperson, say you're selling to a business, you know what I mean? And that business looks you up and the first thing they see is that your CEO gets a 48% effective rating from its employees, they might not buy from you. If your own employees don't even like you, why should I buy from you? Right. So I think it has farther reaching impacts than just hiring or employee happiness or internal culture. It can also impact whether the fact you can scale your product effectively if people are doing research.
So we've talked about a bunch of stuff. There was one, I said I had one other question for you, and it's kind of 2 questions, and then we can do the closing stuff, which is always the same. We talked before we started recording about being smart with capital on the people side and also good tools for early startups, which may or may not be conjoined subjects, but I wanted to kind of hit you with that question. Like, how can people be smart with capital on the people side? And, if tools are part of that, what tools would you recommend people use?
Yeah, absolutely. I think 2 things. When you go to hire, ask yourself, do you absolutely need it? Does it need to be a full-time hire? Can you outsource it? I met with a team today who's a profitable 8-person startup, right? 8 people full-time, but they outsource literally like 4 different components. Compliance, because it's a finance company. Compliance, they outsource HR, they outsource the talent side, and they outsource all of their marketing and like customer success. So you have these like engineers building a team while everything's outsourced. Are they going to need to bring everything in house? Yes, certainly. That's why we're having the conversation, today. Like they're like, which should we do? What can we hire? What's the strategy? But to think like they've already solved the problems they need to solve through outside resources. And then they said, let's hire someone full-time when we need it. Right. And I find that strategy to be really good for a seed early company. Right. Like in that same mindset, if you start really early being lean like that, when you get later, you'll be like that previous client I was telling you about that's just raised a Series B that's 35 people. Most Series Bs are like 60, 70 people, by the time they raise. So I think they've stayed half the size. It's because they had a lean mindset from the start, and I think if you just start asking yourself, is this a hire I really need, or could I solve it fractionally? And like you touched on something earlier that was phenomenal that I wanted to touch on was it's not always about the overall cost. Sometimes it's about the flexibility. You may pay more for 6 months of work outsourced than you would 6 months up front, but in months, full time. But in month 7, you may have to lay that full-time person off, or you may not have as much work and you have to keep paying them for 7 more months.
Right.
And employers always say, I want to hire people with 3 to 4 years of sticking work experience. And it's like, until you actually have that amount of work to give the person the ability to do it if they could and they're successful, stick it to outsourcing, right? And then you can always level up. So I say start there. And then when you do have to hire, don't just hire the brightest, shiniest thing. Hire the person that you can figure out has the best combination of cost versus ROI ability to achieve. You know what I mean? Like there's a good balance there. Sometimes the most expensive person is the best hire. Sometimes the least expensive person is the best hire, but generally it's somewhere in between. And that's the market you want to be in. People that want to have a middle ground and be at your startup. People who want to be vested and take equity packages, who don't mind taking a little less salary up front because they know they're getting, growth, or they're getting better work-life balance because it's a remote team or something, right? Like you have to think about it from that perspective, and just think about how you're smart with your salaries. And then once you figure all that out, how do you acquire the talent is where the other biggest, place you see people lose money. People will leverage their networks early on, and then they'll quit. They won't think about their team that already works there and leveraging their networks and making sure they can get introductions. They'll post a job and they'll get overwhelmed with how many applicants come in because there's so many subpar applicants. They'll say things to me like, I posted it and 500 people came in and I just got overwhelmed. And when I actually looked through, only 3 were any good, right? So I think all of those things are really tough. I tell all startups to avoid success fee recruiting. Like, don't get involved with like anybody who's going to charge you. If someone gets hired, they're not looking out for your team. They're not building your brand. They're really just like, throwing candidates at you and 30 other types of similar profiles. I tend to advise people to hire, we were talking outsourced. Same thing on recruiting. Get someone that has internal experience to do it, whether it's an agency like myself, whether it's somebody who's a consultant. There's a ton of people right now that have had huge success as recruiters internally who are helping fractionally now. So go that route and spend as little as possible. People think 20% is an average cost per hire, and it's a pretty bad cost per hire. And, there's a reason why once companies get to 150 or so, they bring all their talent in-house because it's expensive, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into the couple of questions I ask everybody at the end of each podcast. First one is, what are the 3 best practices that you wish every founder would do? And it doesn't have to be GTM or even talent related. You
mean like from a hiring perspective or people?
Just in general.
Yeah, I think transparency with your people is really huge, right? Like I've learned that I know that people say there's only so much I can tell. Founders are all transparent when everybody's having success, and they lack transparency when the success isn't there, right? And a team rises and falls together, right? So from an HR perspective, like if you can't share your bad times, you shouldn't share your good times, right? Like you can't build a culture on sharing all the good times and celebrating and then not banding together for the bad times and just going radio silent. Like I can't tell you how many times I've seen founders have Friday stand-ups and everything's rah, 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 rah. And then 2 weeks later, there's like layoffs. And you're like, that's not fair to your team. You could have a month ago been like, look, we may get to layoffs, but we got to hit these numbers. And maybe you save 2 jobs because 2 other people figured out a way to do something miraculously, right? So I think transparency is tough. I get it. It's a balancing act, but I think founders tend to not be transparent enough. And, It has nothing to do with being thoughtful. Sometimes the thoughtful thing is to say the hard news, and to communicate the hard stuff. Like morale can go both ways. So I think that's something from an HR perspective that really damages culture that I've seen, right? Like you have these leadership teams that click out during bad times. They keep the doors closed. They don't talk about it. But then when everything's happy, everybody's celebrating it. So change that up. From a hiring perspective, I think the best thing founders should do is stay involved in the hiring to your 100 people. Like interview every single hire to your 100 people. There's no reason a founder shouldn't be interviewing every single person to your 100 people, whether it's the last conversation or not. Like no one should make it to your team without you signing off on it. If you're like, oh, this was a bad hire, well, you were the last person that met this person. You review these notes. And if you don't have the ability to do that as a founder, you need to find the support to make yourself be able to do that. You have to be involved in the hiring and you have to meet every single person that joins your team in the first 100. Or if your team fails, it's on you. I think that's really important. And maybe not being scared to say no. Like a lot of founders will be that person and they'll just like rubber stamp what their team says because they say, he's already been through 5 hours. I think it's easier to be like, no, and this is why. Or I don't actually even want to talk to this person because now that I'm reviewing the feedback, this is why, right? Be the guardian of your culture, your hiring, and do that to 100 and you'll build revenue and scale like you need to. And you'll also know everyone that joins will be like much more feeling like they're a part of the team. It's a partnership, all the things you need to be successful.
That all three of those things are just incredibly valuable advice, both from a culture and an overall success standpoint, but also just in terms of like how to build loyalty on your team, right? Be transparent, meet the first people. Sure, all of that. That was
you and I working together. I don't think we've always had easy conversations. Like I think there's times where you've probably told me
there were times where we couldn't pay you. There was like COVID, I couldn't pay you, right? And that wasn't a fun conversation.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. But we had.
But it wasn't a surprise either, right? It wasn't like you're like, oh, we just did this big kickoff last week, and now he's like, oh, I'm not going to pay you, right? It was you saw that coming because I've always been transparent. I think,
and that goes a long way.
Yeah. I mean, for me, when things got really grim during COVID. I remember talking to our lawyers and they were like shocked that we hadn't lost a single employee. Like, even though, we were in this super bad situation around getting acquired, but maybe not having investors sign off in the acquisition. And it wasn't clear people were going to get paid at one point, even though we had offers. And they were shocked. They were like, how did you keep everybody? And I think it's completely because I was transparent, right? I mean, there is a balance. You don't want to tell people stuff that freaks them out that they can't do anything about. But, there were times where my team figured out solutions to problems that I was, stressed beyond words about. And
anybody we offboarded, we were really upfront and told them why.
Yeah, no, I think it's critical. So the transparency is phenomenal advice. And I've seen too many times, this actually just happened where a board member of a company I'm familiar with, a board member before closing a round was telling the CEO not to tell the new investors about some bad news, because, they hadn't wired yet and they were worried it would come apart. And it's like, hey, welcome to the team. By the way, things suck. Like, thanks for the wire. I mean, how is that a good start to the relationship? So yeah, I can't emphasize how important transparency is. And it's a great piece of advice. So the one other question, which maybe that's advice you got, but the other question I ask is, what is the best advice you personally ever got? It doesn't even have to be business related.
Yeah. Someone told me, and I think it's business related, but it's also like at life in general. When you ask someone a question and they answer, let them finish, right? So like when I'm hiring and I'm trying to solve problems, whether this is me talking to a founder or me interviewing someone, I've interviewed, 13 years in, 14 years in, I've interviewed, 25,000 people at this point in my life, right? So like, everybody's different and every conversation is pretty much directed by what someone else says. And if you just listen to them and let them actually talk and then take your steps from what they say, you're usually in good shape, whether you're a salesperson, whether you're a recruiter, whether you're a product manager who's dealing with engineering stakeholders, whether you're HR, and communicating hard things to people, just letting them feel heard and actually let them unload will also make your life easier, because then you don't have to ask so many probing questions and things like that.
That's great advice. That's great advice. Well, so thank you so much, Chase, for being on the podcast. On the way out, this is phenomenal. On the way out, where can people find you in Early Stage HQ?
EarlyStageHQ.com. We've been around since 2018. We work fractionally with startups from seed to Series B, sometimes Series C if we've worked with them all the way through. But by that point, hopefully we've helped them hire and build talent departments, right? So our goal is we're the only kind of talent team that you need to basically hire everything across your growth from 0 to 100 people or so. So you can always find us, or you can find me, Chase Woolard, on LinkedIn. If you work in startups, most likely we're connected somehow. So just say hi.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about Chase and his team, but I think the most important thing, is hopefully you took something away from this episode around how to do HR, how to do hiring, how to do recruiting for GTM, and to avoid using the sort of pay per placement type of contingency recruiting, because it's really not looking out for your brand and your company. There are other options, whether you work with Chase or somebody else. Like, there are other options that are fractional that'll provide huge dividends over time as you build your own talent pipeline, and you're not just part of a farm system where somebody's trying to shop a resume around. Well, with that, really appreciate you, Chase, for joining us and all the work that you do. If you found this podcast helpful, please like and subscribe. I'm asking now every episode because that's what you're supposed to do. So the kids tell me. Our audio engineer and video editor is James Fix. Ryan DaCosta works on the marketing side of production. Music is by The Great White Shark. I'm your host, Alex Shartsis. Thank you for listening.